You never thought this day would come, did you?
The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of my garage. Through the thin walls, I could hear Erica's voice, honey-sweet and conspiratorial, drifting from our kitchen window. "Tom, you know I can't just leave him overnight without a good reason," she was saying into her phone. "He's suspicious enough already." I froze, crouched beside my Harley's engine, motor oil staining my knuckles. Tom, her ex-husband, the real estate shark who'd made millions flipping waterfront properties while I'd spent 15 years building custom motorcycles in this cramped garage behind our house. "No, baby, I told you. Mike thinks I'm having girls' weekends with Mel. He's too dense to figure it out." Dense. Right. Dense enough to turn down that Singapore job offer last year so she could advance her architecture career here in our decaying port town. Dense enough to work 60-hour weeks so she could afford those designer suits and fancy client dinners. I wiped my hands on a rag and crept closer to the window, my steel-toed boots silent on the oil-stained concrete. The autumn wind carried her laughter through the glass, sharp and musical. I know, but we have to be careful. Mike's not stupid, just trusting. If he ever found out about the condo weekends, he'd lose his mind. My stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. Condo weekends. 3 months of supposed girls' trips to Portland with her best friend Mel. Shopping expeditions and spa treatments that always left her glowing and secretive when she returned. Tomorrow night? Yes, I can manage that. I'll tell him Mel needs help with inventory at the antique shop. The phone call ended with kissing sounds that made my jaw clench. I stood there in my garage, surrounded by the tools and projects that had been my refuge for 15 years, feeling like the biggest fool on the eastern seaboard. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. You learn to watch, to listen, to plan. People see a grease-stained motorcycle mechanic and assume you're simple. They forget that custom fabrication requires precision, patience, and the ability to solve complex problems with limited resources. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. They forget that some of us went to war before we came home to build things with our hands. I spent the next hour methodically cleaning my tools, my mind working through possibilities. When Erica appeared in the garage doorway, silhouetted against the kitchen light in her silk blouse and pencil skirt, I was ready with my best confused husband expression. "Hey, babe," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Mel called. She needs help organizing inventory tomorrow night. Girl stuff, you know? Might be late." "Sure thing," I replied, threading a bolt through a chrome bracket with steady fingers. "I'll probably work late myself. Got a custom order from Boston that's giving me trouble." She smiled, that practiced architect's smile she used on difficult clients. "You're the best, Mike. Don't wait up." After she disappeared back into the house, I sat on my workbench and stared at the pegboard where my tools hung in perfect order. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of believing we were building something together while she was apparently building something else entirely. The next evening, I followed her. Erica thought she was clever, taking her Honda to the train station and catching the commuter rail to Portland, but I knew her patterns better than she realized. I took my truck, staying 3 cars back on Route 1, watching her brake lights navigate the familiar curves toward the city. She didn't go to Mel's antique shop. Instead, she pulled into the parking garage of Harborview Towers, the most expensive residential complex in Portland. I parked across the street and waited, my hands steady on the steering wheel despite the rage building in my chest. 20 minutes later, Tom emerged from the elevator wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He wrapped his arms around my wife in the lobby, spinning her around like they were teenagers instead of cheating adults pushing 40. I took pictures with my phone, the camera clicking softly in the darkness of my truck cab. Evidence, documentation, the beginning of a plan that was already forming in the tactical corners of my mind. When they disappeared into the elevator together, I got out and walked to the parking garage. Tom's silver Tesla sat in a reserved spot marked Penthouse A. I circled the vehicle slowly, noting the custom rims, the vanity plates reading Closer 1, the arrogant perfection of it all. I didn't key the paint or slash the tires. That would have been juvenile, obvious. Instead, I loosened the valve stems on all 4 tires, just enough to create a slow leak that would leave him stranded by morning. Then I used my phone to photograph the license plate, the building directory, anything that might prove useful later. Back in my truck, I composed a text message to Erica. "Working late on the Boston bike. How's inventory going with Mel?" Her response came 30 minutes later. "Exhausting. So much dusty furniture. Probably won't be home until tomorrow afternoon." I stared at that message for a long time, memorizing every lying word. Then I drove home to our empty house and began planning my wife's destruction. The thing about revenge is that amateurs rush in swinging, while professionals gather intelligence first. I'd learned that lesson in Afghanistan, where impatience could get you eliminated. Now, sitting in my garage at 3 a.m, I applied those same principles to my marriage. Erica's purse sat on the kitchen counter where she'd left it, trusting and careless. Inside, beneath her wallet and makeup, I found what I was looking for. A second phone, cheap and plastic, the kind you buy with cash at gas stations. The text history made my stomach turn. 3 months of messages between E and Tommy Boy, filled with plans and promises and intimate details that belonged in my marriage, not in some real estate shark's penthouse. "Can't wait to have you all to myself this weekend," read one from last Friday. "Mike's working late again. Poor guy has no idea how good he's been to us," replied another. Poor guy. I screenshot everything, methodically documenting their affair with the same attention to detail I brought to custom fabrication. Dates, times, locations, a pattern of deception that stretched back to early summer. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the condescension. They talked about me like I was a pet, harmless and stupid, useful for paying bills while they played house in Portland. I replaced the phone exactly where I'd found it and returned to my garage. My workbench had become command central, covered with printed photos, timeline notes, and a growing file of information about Tom's business dealings. Because here's what Erica and her boyfriend didn't understand. When you underestimate someone for 15 years, they have plenty of time to study you back. The next morning, Erica returned home with shopping bags from stores that didn't exist in Mel's neighborhood. She kissed my cheek with lips that had been on another man 12 hours earlier, then disappeared into our bedroom to shower off her lies. "How was inventory?" I called through the bathroom door. "Tedious," she replied over the sound of running water. "But Mel appreciated the help. We found some amazing pieces in the back room." "I'll bet you did?" While she showered, I photographed the contents of her shopping bags. Lingerie from a boutique near Harborview Towers. A bottle of wine with a receipt time-stamped at 2:30 p.m., 3 hours after she'd supposedly been elbow-deep in dusty antiques. That afternoon, I visited Mel's shop under the pretense of looking for a birthday gift. The place was immaculate, not a speck of dust anywhere, certainly no evidence of the massive inventory reorganization that had supposedly kept my wife busy all weekend. "Mike," Mel greeted me with the kind of enthusiasm that immediately raised my suspicions. "What brings you here?" "Looking for something special for Erica's birthday next month," I lied smoothly. "She mentioned you two had quite the adventure organizing inventory this weekend." Something flickered across Mel's face. Surprise, maybe, or guilt. "Oh yes, that. We got through most of it Saturday, actually. Sunday was more about planning future acquisitions." Future acquisitions. I filed that phrase away with all the others. "She seemed exhausted when she got home," I continued, watching Mel's reaction carefully. "Said you two were up until all hours going through boxes in the back room." "Right," Mel nodded too quickly. "Lots of boxes. Very time-consuming." I bought a small antique compass, paying cash and making small talk about business. But I was really studying Mel, cataloging her nervous habits, her tells. After 15 years of marriage to an architect, I'd learned to read people's blueprints, the structural weaknesses that hold everything together until someone applies the right pressure. That evening, I started my campaign. It began subtly. A comment about how refreshed Erica looked after her girls' weekends. A casual mention of the new lingerie I'd found in the laundry. Questions about Mel's business that demonstrated I'd been paying attention to details. "You know," I said over dinner, cutting into the steak I'd grilled while she was working late at the office. "I ran into Dave Morrison today. He mentioned seeing you in Portland last Friday afternoon." Erica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Dave Morrison?" "Yeah, you know Dave. Big guy, drives the blue pickup. He was picking up supplies at that lumberyard near Harborview Towers. Said he waved, but you seemed distracted." "I don't remember seeing Dave," she said carefully. "He said you were with some guy in a fancy suit. Figured it might be a client?" "Probably," she agreed too quickly. "I meet clients all over the city." I nodded and returned to my steak, filing away her reaction. The beauty of psychological pressure is that guilty people apply most of it to themselves. You just have to give them something to worry about, then let their imagination do the heavy lifting. Over the next week, I refined my approach. I started asking specific questions about her girls' weekends, which restaurants she'd visited, what movies she'd seen with Mel, details that would be easy to remember if they were true and impossible to coordinate if they weren't. I also began my research into Tom's business empire. Public records, property transactions, business licenses, all available online if you know where to look. What I found was interesting. Thomas Bradley, age 41, divorced twice, currently facing a lawsuit from investors who claimed he'd misrepresented property values on a waterfront development deal. More importantly, I found his patterns. Tom was a creature of habit, frequenting the same restaurants, the same gym, the same dry cleaner. He lived his life in public, confident and careless, never imagining that someone like me might be watching. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night when Erica announced another spontaneous girls' weekend. Mel found an estate sale in Bar Harbor, she explained, not meeting my eyes. Could be some amazing pieces. We want to drive up Saturday morning, make a weekend of it. Bar Harbor's beautiful this time of year, I agreed. Mind if I tag along? I could use a break from the garage. The panic that flashed across her face was beautiful and terrible. Oh, you'd be bored out of your mind. Estate sales are mostly waiting around while Mel evaluates furniture. Plus, we're planning to do some girl talk, you know? Sure, I said. I understand. But what I understood was that my wife was planning another weekend in Tom's penthouse while lying to my face about antique shopping. That night, after she fell asleep, I made my final preparations. I installed a tracking app on her phone, not the burner, which she guarded carefully, but her regular iPhone that she never suspected I could access. Then I booked myself a room at the Harbor View Towers Hotel, 3 floors below Tom's penthouse. If Erica wanted to play games, I was ready to change the rules. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that makes Maine look like a postcard. Erica kissed me goodbye with lips that tasted like mint and lies, promising to bring me back something special from Bar Harbor. Drive safe, I told her, watching from our front porch as she loaded her overnight bag into the Honda. Call me when you get there. She waved from the driver's seat, her smile bright and false as a campaign poster. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the corner, then loaded my own bag into the truck. The tracking app showed her car heading south toward Portland instead of north toward Bar Harbor. What a surprise. I gave her a 30-minute head start, then followed the same route I'd taken a week earlier. This time, though, I wasn't just observing. This time, I was going to introduce myself to the competition. The Harbor View Towers Hotel occupied the first 5 floors of the same building where Tom kept his penthouse. I checked in using a credit card Erica didn't know about, a business account I'd opened for motorcycle parts that had been accumulating cash for 3 years. My room on the 8th floor had a view of the parking garage where Tom's Tesla sat in its reserved space. I unpacked methodically, laying out the tools of my new trade, cameras with telephoto lenses, audio recording equipment, and a laptop loaded with everything I'd learned about Tom's business practices. Then I settled in to wait. At 6:30 p.m., I watched through my telephoto lens as Erica and Tom emerged from the penthouse elevator, dressed for dinner at some expensive restaurant where the waiters probably earned more than I made in a week. They looked happy, relaxed, like a couple with nothing to hide. That was about to change. I followed them at a distance, staying 3 cars back as Tom's Tesla navigated Portland's narrow streets. They ended up at Artemis, a waterfront restaurant where entrees started at $50 and the wine list required a mortgage consultation. I parked across the street and called the restaurant. Artemis, how may I help you? Hi, I'm trying to reach Tom Bradley. He's dining with you tonight, and I have an urgent message about his Baxter Point development project. One moment, please. Through the restaurant's windows, I watched a waiter approach Tom's table. Watched Tom's face change from relaxed to concerned as he took the phone. Watched Erica's expression shift from romantic to annoyed as her evening was interrupted. Tom Bradley speaking. Mr. Bradley, this is Mike Patterson. I think we need to talk. The silence stretched long enough for me to count Tom's heartbeats through the telephoto lens. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I'm sorry. I don't believe I know any Mike Patterson. Sure you do, Tom. I'm Erica's husband. You know, the dense guy who's been paying for her shopping trips while you two play house in your penthouse? Through the camera lens, I watched Tom's face go pale. He said something to Erica, who immediately grabbed her purse and started looking around the restaurant like she expected me to materialize from behind a potted plant. What do you want? Tom asked. Right now, I want you to enjoy your dinner. The lobster looks excellent from where I'm sitting. But Tom, after tonight, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about respect and consequences. I hung up and watched the show. Tom trying to maintain his composure while obviously rattled. Erica demanding explanations in urgent whispers. The romantic evening dissolving into paranoid glances toward every window and doorway. They lasted 20 minutes before asking for the check. I followed them back to Harbor View Towers, parking in the same spot across the street. My phone rang as they disappeared into the elevator. Mike? Erica's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. I just got the strangest call from Tom. He said, He said I called him during your romantic dinner at Artemis, I interrupted. Yeah, that was me. The silence was profound. Mike, I can explain. Can you? Because I'm really curious how you're going to explain 3 months of weekend trips to your ex-husband's penthouse while telling me you were helping Mel with inventory. How did you find out? Erica, I've known for weeks. The burner phone, the receipts, the lingerie from boutiques that don't exist in Bar Harbor. Did you really think I was that stupid? Mike, please, just listen. No, you listen. I'm sitting in a hotel room 3 floors below your boyfriend's penthouse, and I have enough evidence to make both your lives very interesting. Photos, recordings, documentation of every lie you've told me since July. What do you want? What do I want? I laughed, and even I was surprised by how cold it sounded. I want my wife to stop treating me like an idiot. I want Tom to understand that actions have consequences, and I want both of you to remember that underestimating people is dangerous. Mike, we can work this out. We're way past working things out, Erica. Way past. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to enjoy your weekend with Tom. You're going to pretend everything is normal. And on Monday, we're going to discuss the terms of your surrender. I hung up and turned off my phone. Through the telephoto lens, I could see lights on in the penthouse, shadows moving behind expensive curtains. I imagined the conversation happening up there, Erica's panic, Tom's anger, both of them trying to figure out how much I knew and what I planned to do with the information. Let them wonder. Let them sweat. Let them spend the weekend looking over their shoulders and jumping at every unexpected sound. Because this was just the opening move. I ordered room service and settled in for a long night of surveillance. Tomorrow I would begin the systematic destruction of their comfortable little fantasy. But tonight I was content to watch them squirm in their glass tower, finally understanding that the dense motorcycle mechanic was smarter than they'd ever imagined. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing defense. Monday morning brought the kind of gray drizzle that makes October in Maine feel like the end of the world. I was back in my garage by 6 a.m., working on a custom exhaust system and waiting for Erica to come home from her weekend of lies. She arrived at noon, looking haggard and defeated. Her key turned in the front door with the hesitant sound of someone who wasn't sure what they'd find inside. "Mike?" she called from the kitchen. "Are you home?" I didn't answer immediately. Let her wonder. Let her walk through our house, the house I'd been paying for while she played games with her ex-husband, and think about what she'd thrown away. When I finally emerged from the garage, she was sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, still wearing the clothes she'd packed for her fake antique hunting trip. "We need to talk," she said. "Yes, we do." I poured my own coffee and sat across from her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly around the mug. "How was Bar Harbor?" "Mike, please." "No, I'm curious. Did you and Mel find any good pieces at that estate sale? Any amazing antiques worth driving 3 hours for?" She closed her eyes. "You know I wasn't in Bar Harbor. I know you've been lying to me for 3 months. I know you've been sleeping with your ex-husband while I worked 60-hour weeks to support your career. I know you think I'm too stupid to figure out what was happening in my own marriage." "I never said you were stupid." "You didn't have to say it, Erica. You said it with every lie, every fake girls' weekend, every time you came home from Tom's bed and kissed me like nothing had changed." She started crying then, the kind of careful tears that architects use when a project goes over budget. Professional remorse, calculated to achieve maximum impact with minimum commitment. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for it to happen. Tom and I, we have history, and when he moved back to Portland—" "Stop." I held up a hand. "I don't want to hear about your history with Tom. I don't want your excuses or your apologies. What I want is for you to understand that this marriage is over. Mike, we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can't fix betrayal, Erica. We can't counsel away 3 months of lies. But here's what we can do. We can end this with whatever dignity you have left, or we can end it with me sharing those photos and recordings with everyone in your professional and social circle." Her tears stopped immediately. "You wouldn't. Try me." We stared at each other across the kitchen table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 15 years, where we'd planned vacations and discussed dreams and built what I'd thought was a life together. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "I want you to pack your things and move out. Today. I want you to transfer your half of the joint accounts to me as compensation for the money you've been spending on your affair, and I want you to stay away from Tom until our separation is finalized. I can't just leave Tom. You can, and you will, because Tom's about to have bigger problems than missing his weekend girlfriend." "What does that mean?" I smiled, and I could see my expression reflected in her frightened eyes. It means I've been doing some research into your boyfriend's business practices. It means I've found some very interesting information about his Baxter Point development deal. And it means Tom is about to learn that I'm not just a motorcycle mechanic who got lucky with a wrench. That afternoon, after Erica packed her things and left for her sister's house in Bangor, I made my first move against Tom. I called the Portland Press-Herald and asked to speak with their investigative reporter. "This is Janet Morrison." "Ms. Morrison, I have information about potential fraud in the Baxter Point waterfront development project. Are you interested in a story about investors being misled about property values and environmental impact studies?" "I'm listening." I spent an hour on the phone, carefully feeding Janet Morrison the information I'd gathered about Tom's business practices. Public records that showed discrepancies between his environmental reports and the actual site conditions. Investor complaints that had been buried in legal paperwork. A pattern of behavior that suggested Tom Bradley was more interested in quick profits than honest development. "This is solid information," Morrison said when I finished. "Can you provide documentation?" "I'll email everything this afternoon, but I want to remain anonymous." "Of course. Can I ask what your interest is in this story?" "Let's just say I don't like people who think they're smarter than everyone else." The story ran Wednesday morning under the headline, "Waterfront Development Under Investigation." By Thursday, Tom's investors were demanding answers. By Friday, the state environmental agency had announced a formal review of the Baxter Point project. I watched it all unfold from my garage, monitoring local news websites and social media while I worked on custom bike orders. Tom's carefully constructed empire was starting to show cracks, and I'd barely gotten started. Friday evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. "You son of a..." Tom's voice was raw with anger. "Hello, Tom. How's the development business? You think you're clever, don't you? Calling reporters, spreading lies." "I haven't told any lies, Tom. Everything in that newspaper story came from public records. Your own environmental reports, your own investor agreements. I just helped a journalist connect the dots. This isn't over." "You're right about that. This is just the beginning. See, Tom, you made a mistake when you decided to play games with my marriage. You assumed I was too stupid to fight back. But here's the thing about underestimating people. Sometimes they surprise you." "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to remember that every choice has a price, and I want you to stay away from my wife. Erica's not your wife anymore. Erica's not your girlfriend anymore either, because after this week, you're going to be too busy dealing with lawyers and investigators to worry about romance." I hung up and returned to my workbench, where the custom exhaust system was finally taking shape. Beautiful, functional, built to last, unlike some people's relationships. The weekend passed quietly. Erica called twice, wanting to talk, wanting to explain, wanting to negotiate terms that no longer existed. I let her calls go to voicemail and focused on my work. Monday brought news that the state environmental agency had found significant discrepancies in Tom's Baxter Point reports. Tuesday brought news that 3 major investors were withdrawing from the project. Wednesday brought news that Tom Bradley Development was facing a federal investigation. Thursday brought Tom himself to my garage. I heard the Tesla's whisper-quiet engine in my driveway around 8 p.m., just as I was closing up the garage for the night. Through the window, I watched Tom climb out of his silver car, straighten his expensive suit, and walk toward my door like he owned the place. Old habits, I suppose. I opened the door before he could knock, wiping my hands on a shop rag and taking my time to look him over. He was still handsome in that real estate agent way. Perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect tie that probably cost more than most people's car payments. But there were cracks in the façade now, dark circles under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of sleepless nights and expensive lawyers. "Mike," he said, like we were old friends meeting for coffee. "Tom." I stepped aside to let him into the garage. "Come to admire my work?" He looked around at my tools, my workbench, the half-finished motorcycle projects that filled every corner of the space. I could see him cataloging everything, trying to understand how someone who worked with his hands had managed to dismantle his empire with such precision. "Nice setup," he said finally. "It serves its purpose, like everything else in my life." We stood there for a moment, 2 men who'd been circling each other for months finally face to face. Tom in his $1,000 suit, me in coveralls stained with honest work. The contrast wasn't lost on either of us. "The newspaper story," Tom said. "The investigation. That was you." The newspaper story was about public records and investor complaints. The investigation was about environmental violations and potential fraud. I just made some phone calls. "You destroyed my business." "Your business destroyed itself, Tom. I just helped speed up the process." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think you're so smart, don't you? The clever mechanic who outmaneuvered the slick businessman. I think I'm smart enough to know when someone's playing games with my life, and I think I'm smart enough to play better games when I have to. This isn't a game, Mike. This is my livelihood, my reputation, years of work. Like my marriage was years of work? Like the trust I put in my wife was something real and valuable? Tom's perfect composure cracked slightly. Erica came to me, Mike. I didn't chase her. She was unhappy, looking for something you couldn't give her. What I couldn't give her was lies and drama and the thrill of sneaking around behind her husband's back. You're right, Tom. I couldn't give her that. She deserved better than this. He gestured around the garage, dismissing 15 years of my life with a wave of his manicured hand. She deserved honesty. She deserved a husband who respected her enough to ask for a separation instead of cheating. But mostly, Tom, she deserved better than you. That hit home. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. You self-righteous? Careful, I interrupted, my voice quiet, but carrying the kind of edge I'd learned in places where words could get you hurt. You came to my garage, Tom, my property, my rules. He took a step back, finally recognizing that the balance of power had shifted permanently. What do you want? He asked. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to remember that when you play games with people's lives, sometimes they play back, and I want you to stay away from Erica. She's not your wife anymore. She's not your girlfriend either, because after this week, you won't have time for girlfriends. You'll be too busy explaining to federal investigators why your environmental reports don't match the actual site conditions at Baxter Point. Tom's face went pale. How do you know about the soil contamination you didn't report? About the wetland boundaries you moved on paper but not in reality? About the investor money you spent on personal expenses while telling people their funds were in escrow? You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove it, Tom. The FBI will prove it. I just had to point them in the right direction. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Tom's arrogance, Erica's betrayal, my patient planning and careful execution. You've ruined me, he said finally. You ruined yourself. I just documented the process. He turned to leave, then stopped at the garage door. Erica still loves me. Erica loves the idea of you, the excitement, the drama, the feeling that she was getting away with something. But Tom, when the FBI starts asking questions about your business practices, when the newspapers start digging into your financial records, when your perfect life falls apart piece by piece, she'll remember why she divorced you the first time. After he left, I stood in my garage surrounded by the tools and projects that had been my refuge for so many years. The custom exhaust system was finally complete, a beautiful and functional and built to last, like the plan I'd executed over the past month. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The Singapore job is still available if you're interested. We could use someone with your skills. David Chen, Regional Manager. I stared at that message for a long time, thinking about fresh starts and new beginnings, about leaving behind the wreckage of my marriage and Tom's business empire and starting over somewhere nobody knew my story. Then I typed back, "When do I start?" The response came immediately. "How soon can you get here?" I looked around my garage one last time, at 15 years of careful work and patient craftsmanship, at the life I'd built with my hands and the tools that had never let me down. Then I started making a list of what I'd need to pack. Some games you play to win, some games you play to teach lessons, and some games you play to clear the board completely and start fresh somewhere else. I'd played all three, and I'd won every round. Time to collect my prize and disappear before anyone figured out exactly how I'd done it.